Alright, hello everyone, Muckluck here. Today is Monday, June 27th. Tomorrow, Tuesday the 28th, is when they have scheduled the release of the patch that I went over a few days ago in a couple of very long videos with some changes to class balance for all 9 classes. And in response to that, Guild Wars 2 got a lot of negative backlash. Now, like, I fully understand if you've got a patch coming and your class is getting nerfed or the other class is getting buffed or, you know, something like that happening. Like, being bummed out, frustrated, you know? It's like, it sucks. However, there was some other stuff that happened that I'm not going to go into. But it ended with people actually sending death threats. And, you know, you need to fire this person, stuff like that. Now, I wasn't going to go into that. I was not going to do a news video on that topic because I didn't want to give them the spotlight. I didn't want to give them time of day, and I'm not going to call any names on that either. However, the end result of that is that ArenaNet has released this blog post, and I do feel that this is worth discussing, so let's begin. Hi all, Game Director Josh Grouch Davis here. On Friday we posted the Profession update notes for the June 28th release, and since then there's been a lot of heated discussion about the changes and what they might mean for the game. I've read thousands of comments since Friday, and I think there's plenty of reasonable feedback. There always is. To pause really quickly, there was a lot of conversations about the patch that they discussed in the official Guild Wars 2 forums, which is where I'm reading this right now, as well as on the Reddit. I'm not here to address those issues individually, but rather I'd like to share some of my own perspective and talk about our next steps as a team. A clear direction. It's clear that we should have provided better context for the changes. All right, to pause there for a second, for anyone who's like, why are they so mad? I don't agree with like the threats or anything like that. I think that is absolutely ridiculous. However, I do understand, again, like getting bummed out or getting angry because, you know, something you like is getting nerfed or taken away or something like that. So the big thing, Catalyst is getting a pretty heavy-handed nerf, and Warrior is getting a heavy-handed nerf and possibly is getting broken. Now, of course, if that were to be the case, I'm sure like in a very quick follow-up patch they would fix that. But it doesn't look great, but I would want to test it before I started like, you know, doing, well, I started to say before I would start doing like a witch hunt. I don't think I would ever do a witch hunt, but before I would start like complaining and stuff like that. I would want to test it in like the special ops training room or something like that, because you know, a lot of people are saying like, oh, we're losing banners. Well, everyone's losing the banners buff. You know, like, oh, we're losing spotter. Literally everyone's losing spotter. What we need to balance is what's left. Like all the old DPS benchmarks are out the window. They're all going to be lower by a bit after these buffs that we were used to having are gone. Okay, so a lot of people upset about those changes. It's much more difficult to assess a given change without a shared understanding of the underlying goal of the change and the problem it's trying to solve for. I'm not saying that we think the update is flawless or that this is purely a communication issue. There are always valid criticisms of execution, and we welcome that feedback. For this update, we opted to forego including design notes in the release notes that explain the why behind the changes, and instead chose to provide a general overview in the June Studio Update blog. This wasn't an arbitrary decision on our part, but in retrospect, it was the wrong decision. We'll update our approach for future updates. So basically that's meaning, you know, in the last notes that I went over, they just said, you know, this is changing, this is changing, this is changing, but they didn't say why it was changing. Like, hey, we're nerfing this because it was overperforming in fractals and people were, you know, pulling mobs through a wall and one-shotting the boss. I don't know. I'm just ad-libbing here. But they didn't explain the why, and they feel that that's part of the reason everything's blown up. So, in the near term, our team will be writing up the design notes for the June 20th Profession changes, which we'll publish on the official forums as soon as they're ready. I'd like to ask for your patience as we work on this while we are supporting the release. Perhaps more importantly, we need to share the long-term vision for Guild Wars 2's Profession balance and how it applies to PvE, PvP, and World v. World. This has been provided piecemeal over the years, and some of it has bubbled up through unofficial channels without full context, but we haven't provided anything official. This is a good opportunity for us to introduce some new voices in the internal discussion as well. Cameron Rich, for example, who recently took on the role of lead systems designer for Guild Wars 2. This future post will be a larger collaborative effort that will take some time to complete, especially as we bring new voices into the process, but we'll aim to have it ready before our next major Professions update. Feedback. As game developers, it's our mission to deliver experiences that our players will love. One of the best ways to achieve this is by including the voice of the player in the development process, before things ship live. I think this is especially true for a game like Guild Wars 2, where many of you have spent the last 10 years investing your time and energy into this world. We can do better on this front. We don't have a definitive solution yet, but there are plenty of options for us to evaluate, with different costs and trade-offs for each. What I do know is that it's my responsibility to the team and our players to ensure that our developers have the tools they need to do their job, and player feedback is one of the most powerful tools we have in our toolbox. I want to pause there for a second to anyone who... I've seen a couple, it's a minority, but I've seen a few people since this whole thing started be like, they're asking players who to buff and nerf. Well, those players are just going to say, you know, buff my class, nerf their class. Like, this is This isn't new. This isn't a new thing. Now, I myself didn't know that this was happening, but I'm not surprised at all. I mean, the studio for Guild Wars 2 is like, what, a couple hundred people? Counting janitors? Like, they cannot possibly in their studio, even if every single one of them was on the testing team, which they're not, they cannot possibly test every possible outcome. You know, there's always going to be, like, if you've got something that happens 0.01% of the time, it won't pop up when they test it in-house. But it will pop up for hundreds of cases when it hits the general public. World of Warcraft, you know, they've been running a PTR, a public test realm, where players can go there, know that they're getting basically early access to the next patch, and know that there may be some bugs and imbalances, and they can report stuff. Like, getting players to help, you know, iron out the kinks in the fabric, so to speak, is not a new thing. That's not a new thing. It's unpaid QA, but it's not a new thing. But yeah, I don't think that alone is something to get upset over. All right. What I can commit to today is that going forward, we'll preview our profession changes much further in advance of a major update, not the Friday before, even if it means that the changes are still in progress and the preview isn't exhaustive. This will give the team time to assess feedback and make any necessary changes prior to the update going live. I think it's especially important that we do this when we're making larger changes to long-standing systems or mechanics. Pretty cut and dry. If they're going to make changes like they announced a few days ago, they'll do it further out so that they have more time for people to respond, and then respond to those responses and maybe make changes to it. But, you know, right now they basically, you know, Friday they announced the changes, they went home for the weekend, and then, you know, some of them I saw them on Reddit over the weekend, and then Monday, there was just one business day between then and the patch. So they didn't really give themselves a lot of time to make adjustments here. Hold on, I'm focusing my camera. Okay. All right. Let's see. But I recognize, let's see, always changing. I recognize that some of you are frustrated. Through the years, profession balance hasn't always received the attention it deserves. And that's true. That's true. To pause there, like, I myself have been a content creator for Guild Wars 2 for between 3 and 4 years. And the first year or two of that was, like, dead silence. And from what I understand, like, the years leading up to that were dead silence. And then they came back with a storm. Yeah, they came back with a vengeance. They came back and they're like, we're going to do better. We're going to do this. You know, we promised World v World alliances 17 years ago. We're actually going to do that now. And they just started knocking stuff out. I would imagine that, you know, that's you know, they got greenlit for End of Dragons. They probably got more funding from the people upstairs, stuff like that. So there was a very long time that, you know, they were not updating regularly. That's always been a lingering concern that the next update will be a long way off. Before I was an Arena employee, I was a Guild Wars 2 player, and I felt those frustrations myself. Your character and profession are the vehicle through which you experience the game, and the balance and feel of it have a significant influence on your moment-to-moment enjoyment of it. This is precisely why we created a dedicated profession balance team after the release of End of Dragons. Guild Wars 2 is a live game, meaning that it will continue to grow and evolve in the years ahead. On the whole, it's very different today compared to what it started 10 years ago, and those changes didn't come all at once. Similarly, addressing core issues in a profession, balance, and design is going to be a long-term incremental effort. We can't change everything at once, nor should we. We'll undoubtedly make mistakes along the way. My commitment to you is that we'll listen, we'll own and address our mistakes, and that we'll keep moving the game forward. As far as like we shouldn't change everything at once, I agree with that. Having played MMOs on and off for like 20 years, in my opinion, the best way to do it is occasionally have like a really big patch like this, and then have many small patches. Like, let's say they do this patch, and I don't know, Mesmer, or okay, everyone bullies Mechanist. Let's say Mechanist is 100% completely busted tomorrow. Hopefully in a week or two, they're like, you know what? This can't wait for the next major patch. We've made the following small changes to the numbers on the Mechanist. Hey, y'all were right. Looks like Warrior is in the gutter. Hopefully in like a week or two, they're like, all right, hey, this can't wait for the next patch. Here's some buffs to this, this, and this, and there will be more in the future. That's what I like to see. I like to see the occasional, very large patch that shakes things up, and then many small ones that are constantly trying to, even out the balance between the classes. That would be the ideal if I had any say in it. Wrapping up. Tomorrow morning, the June 28th release will go live, along with the balance changes previewed on Friday. Up until this point, I wasn't sure if it was going to. As soon as we can, we'll follow up with the design notes for the update. From there, we'll be reading your feedback, evaluating impact of the changes, and determining your next steps. I gotta say, I feel like most of through this conversation, this video, I've been essentially defending ArenaNet. I do think this is a mistake. I think the design notes should go live so that people can understand them and come to terms with them before things are changed and things are taken away. I do think that is not a great choice. We've added a follow-up balance update to our release schedule in the coming weeks to address critical issues. An update in the coming weeks to address, so they're planning ahead. They're planning for if tomorrow breaks anything within the next couple of weeks, there is another patch where they could possibly fix things, which is very similar to what I described a few minutes ago. I'm happy to see that. Then in mid-fall, we'll have our next major professions update. Somewhere in between, we'll share our profession balance philosophy. Finally, I'd like to thank those of you who have approached this discussion in a civil manner. To those who have chosen extreme toxicity, called for developers to be fired, or sent death threats, you're not welcome in our community. Signed, Josh Davis, the game director. My sighs are toward the people that sent messages like that. I'm very much, I was not someone who was hyped up for Cyberpunk, but when Cyberpunk was about to come out, they had to post many delays, and they started getting death threats. That was maybe the first time I heard about such a thing happening, but it's wild to me. Like, there was a game I was really looking forward to coming out last month called, the Riftbreaker was getting a expansion called Metal Menace, and it got delayed. It got delayed a month. And in my mind, I'm just like, man, okay. And I went to my calendar and I just moved the release date on my calendar. That's it. I cannot fathom the people that, start sending threats over this. Like, what, you want them to just like, hold a threat over their head, and then they release it now and it's not ready and the whole game's broken down? You remember how Cyberpunk wasn't released? That's what you get when you rush them. Like, it's insane. It's insane. Yeah, if it needs to be said, if you need to hear it from me, don't act like that. Don't act like a tool. It's not just like not needed in the community. It's not needed in humanity. Like, just don't. Just don't. In any case, yeah, I don't think they're doing things perfectly here. A lot of things have gone wrong with this. Let's see what tomorrow brings, run the numbers, test things on target dummies, where all the benchmarks are going to be different because Spotter, Banners, Frost Spirit, Sun Spirit, those are going to be gone. They're just going to give boons, but you could have gotten those boons from somewhere else before. So the absolute maximum of what people can do is going to be different tomorrow. We're going to try it out. We're going to see what happens. And if some classes look really bad, then in the follow-up patch in a week or two, they're hopefully going to balance those. I will say, I fully understand people being kind of hesitant to trust on this. I don't think that's any excuse for sending threats or anything like that, but being hesitant to trust, I get it. For example, like a year plus ago, they did the PvP talents update where they changed a bunch of PvP talents to 300-second cooldowns. And they're like, this is a temporary thing, we're going to come back and fix these later. That still hasn't happened. We're still waiting on that. You know, Mechanist still doesn't work underwater. You know, they promised World v World Alliances years before it seems like they actually started on it. You know, they do have a history of setting something down and then just leaving it for years, Dungeons. So, I get it. That's not an excuse, like, that's an excuse to be like, okay, I'm not a customer anymore. That's not an excuse to be like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna send threats. All right, anyway, I feel like I'm going into father mode way too much here. In any case, I thought that this was worth sharing. You know, it is on the forums. As always, I will have a link to this discussion in the description down below if you wish to watch it there. As always, I want to thank my community. Most of you are extremely civil most of the time, and I hope it stays that way. If you've got anything else to share on this, feel free to drop it in the comments down below, and we will see what tomorrow brings. Take care.